everyone, I'm Manashrata, a third year undergraduate majoring in electrical engineering. I shall now be delivering a presentation on the history of codes and ciphers before the advent of the modern era. So this is a general overview of the flow of the seminar. I shall begin with what codes and ciphers are, move on to the timeline through the ages, and then elaborate on a few ciphers that I found intriguing and relevant in the field of cryptology, and finally end with advances in the modern era. So, about codes and ciphers. So, what are codes and ciphers? A code is like an unvarying rule for replacing a piece of information with another object, but not necessarily of the same sort. Uh, Ciphers also replace a piece of information with another object. The difference is that this replacement is made according to a rule defined by a secret key. All ciphers involve either transposition or substitution, or a combination of these two operations. Codes are a particular type of cipher system, but not all cipher systems are codes. In particular, the Enigma, which is quite popular, is often erroneously referred to as the Enigma code, but it is a cipher and not a code. So the field of cryptography is an essential component of modern electrical engineering, with applications ranging from secure communication to digital signatures and authentication. Uh, so with this in mind, I would like to go forward with my presentation about the history of codes and ciphers before the bloom of cryptology in the modern era, as it is equally important to map their origins. So first off, we have the classical period, which is up till 500 CE. So the Indians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, and every other ancient civilization had their own way of encryption and decryption techniques, which were unique to them. And so the problem of considering the security of the messages also had to be considered. So with this, I'd like to start with an interesting story that I read related to the ancient Greeks. So for the problem of security, they thought up a bizarre solution. They took a slave, shaved his head, and scratched the message on it. When his hair had grown back, they sent him off to deliver the message. The recipient shaved the slave's head and read the message. This is clearly a very insecure and inefficient method, but amusing. And so, the first known evidence of the use of cryptography was found in an inscription carved around 1900 BC in ancient Egypt, within the main chamber of the tomb of a ancient Egyptian great chief Namhotep II. So here the scribe used some very unusual hieroglyphic symbols here and there in place of the more ordinary ones. And next we have the Advash cipher, which is a mono-alphabetic substitution cipher, originally used to encrypt the Hebrew alphabet. It is formed by taking the alphabet and then mapping it to itself in the reverse order. We then have the cytale, which is quite popular and was used by the Spartans in ancient Greece. So this method involved wrapping a strip of parchment around a rod of a certain diameter and then writing the message along the parchment's length. And this message could only be read if it was wrapped around a rod of the same diameter. We then have the Ardhashastra, which is an ancient Indian treatise on statecraft, economic policy, and military strategy, written by Kautilya, who is quite famous. And this is believed to be one of the earliest known texts that mention the use of codes and ciphers in the context of espionage and communication. This included several methods for encoding messages like substitution ciphers, transposition ciphers, etc., as well as how to break codes and ciphers that were used by enemy spies. And now the Caesar cipher, which is very popular. It was developed by Julius Caesar during the Roman Empire around 50 BCE. This is a substitution cipher that replaces each letter of the original message with another letter typically a fixed number of positions down the alphabet, and Caesar used the number 3 more often. Now, coming to the medieval and Renaissance era, which is the 16th till the 18th century. So, first off, in the Western European context, we see that Galileo applied ciphers to document all of his scientific conjectures, because in that age there were copyrights and patents were in like their embryonic form, and so they could not testify who discovered something first, and so this was his way of protecting his inventions. And we also have Robert Boyle, who enciphered his alchemical findings to protect the results of his experiments. And I read another interesting story in the context of ciphers about Mary, who was the Queen of Scotland in the 1500s. So Mary was imprisoned in a place called the Chartley Hall by her cousin, the Queen Elizabeth II of England, because there was this conspiracy that she had murdered her own husband, the Earl. And so while she was imprisoned, her correspondence to her subjects was in the form of messages that were wrapped in a leather packet and hidden inside a hollow plug that was used to seal a barrel of beer. And this can be considered an example of steganography, which is the method of concealing messages or information within non-secret text or data, as in it's not expected to be in that form. So the story of the Greeks I mentioned can also be considered as another example of the same. So resuming with the story, a man called Babington developed a very ambitious plan where he wanted to free Mary, Queen of Scots, as well as assassinate the Queen. So they then decided that her approval was necessary for the same, and sent her a letter encoded in a nomenclature cipher. And Gifford, who was involved in transferring the letter to Mary, he was also a double agent working with Queen Elizabeth. So he leaked the message to them, and it was cracked using frequency analysis, and Mary was executed when she approved of the assassination plan. Coming back to the timeline, we have the Alberti cipher that was invented by Leon Battista Alberti in the 15th century. This was a significant improvement over the monoalphabetic ciphers. And we then have the Trithemius cipher that was invented by the German cryptographer Johannes Trithemius, published in his book Polygraphia. So here he employed the use of something called the tabula recta, which is a square table of alphabets, and this is often referred to while we bring up the topic of pre-computer ciphers. Moving on to book ciphers, they were first mentioned in 1526 in the works of Jacobus Silvestri. So he wrote of a sort of code book or dictionary which he recommended as a means to encode written communications. So book ciphers are homophonic substitution ciphers, and which mean that we replace each letter with a variety of substitutes, and the number of substitutes are proportional to the frequency of the letter. For example, A is quite frequent, so that will have more letters, more substitutes. Sorry. We then have the Cardan grill, which is a cryptographic device invented by the Italian mathematician Girolamo Cardano in the 16th century. This was a very simple yet popular cipher back then. We then have the Virginaire cipher, which is a polyalphabetic cipher that was invented in 1553 by the Italian cryptographer Jovan Battista Bellaso. And what a polyalphabetic cipher is like is any cipher which is based on substitution using several substitution alphabets instead of just one, like the monoalphabetic cipher. We then have the Porta cipher, which is a polyalphabetic substitution cipher that was invented by Jovan Battista della Porta. So the Virginaire cipher is a polyalphabetic cipher with 26 alphabets, and the Porter cipher is basically the same except that it uses 13 alphabets. In 1605, Francis Bacon created a cipher referred to as the Bacon cipher or the Baconian cipher, in which he employed the techniques of substitution and steganography. And brushing up on what steganography is, it is the practice of representing information within another message or physical object in such a manner that the presence of the information is not evident to human inspection. Moving on to the Age of Enlightenment, we have the Great Cipher of Louis the 14th. That was a sophisticated code system developed in the late 17th centuries by two French cryptographers, Antoine and Bonaventure Rossignol. And this was later deciphered in the 19th century by Etienne Beziris. We then have the Jefferson desk cipher, also called the Beziris cylinder or wheel cipher, that was invented by Thomas Jefferson in 1795. And this cipher used a set of wheels or discs, each containing the letters of the alphabet in a random order. And by aligning the discs in a particular way, a secret message could be enciphered or deciphered. This was used by the United States government for diplomatic communications for many years. We then have the Playfair cipher, or it's also called the Playfair square or the Wheatstone Playfair cipher. And this is a manual symmetric encryption technique, and is also the first literal diagram substitution cipher. And so a diagram is like a pair of letters, and this was first invented in 1854 by Charles Wheatstone. And so this is the first cipher to encrypt pairs of letters in cryptologic history. Now let's talk about polyalphabetic ciphers. So polyalphabetic ciphers periodically changed the cipher alphabet as the text went on, and were seen as being too complicated to use in the 15th century back then. So the first polyalphabetic cipher was the Alberti cipher that was introduced by Leon Battista Alberti in the year 1467. So this used the random alphabet to encrypt the plain text, but at different points, and it can change the different mixed alphabet, denoting the change with an uppercase letter in the cipher text. You can see the uppercase letters on the outer disk. So this embodies the first example of polyalphabetic substitution with mixed alphabets and variable period. And so this device on the right, you can see it's called the Alberti cipher disk. It's called the formula. So it was made of two concentric disks, and which could rotate with which could rotate with respect to the other. The larger one is called the stabilis, and the smaller one is called the mobilis, and this can be rotated, the smaller one. And in this cipher, we have two methods of encipherment. First off, we use a lowercase letter on the mobilis as the index, and then an uppercase letter in the ciphertext corresponds to this index. So like for example, A is corresponding to the index G, and then it is rotated like in the current format, and then the ciphertext is decoded, and then a change is denoted with the next uppercase letter in the ciphertext. And you'll then switch rotate the mobilis to the next change. And so compared to previous ciphers of the time, the Alberti cipher also the second talking about the second method of encipherment, we have an uppercase letter that will be used as the index, and here the text corresponding to the numbers will denote a change. Alright, so coming to previous ciphers of the time, this cipher was impossible to break without knowledge of the method, because frequency distribution of the letters was masked, and frequency analysis, which was the only known technique at the time, was of no help. That being said, the Alberti cipher is rather easy to break currently, given that the key progression was poorly concealed from attackers, and the capitalized letter denoting the change was a very major clue to the cryptanalyst. We then have the Trithemius cipher that was invented by German monk Johannes Trithemius, and he described it in his book The Polygraphia, which was published in 1508. This is considered to be one of the first books dedicated entirely to cryptography. And so Trithemius introduced the term tabula recta, which refers to a square table of alphabets, each row of which is made by shifting the previous one to the left, as you can see in this, by one position. Trithemius used the tabula recta to define a polyalphabetic cipher, and which was equivalent to Alberti's cipher disk, except that the order of the letters in the target alphabet was not fixed. And in 1553, an important extension to Trithemius's method was developed by João Batista Bellasso, which is now called the Vergenère cipher. So moving on to the Vergenère cipher, this is one of the simplest and popular algorithms in polyalphabetic cipher, and it was invented in 1553 by the Italian cryptographer João Batista Bellasso, but it was credited for centuries to the 16th century cryptographer Blaise de Vergenère, who also developed a similar cipher in 1586. And for many years, this was thought to be impregnable and was known as the unbreakable cipher. So here we are given a key. For example, in this picture I have, the key is cover, which is repeated as many times as necessary to encode the plain text message using the table on the left, on this side. In 1861, Friedrich Kasiski, who was a German army officer and cryptanalyst, published the solution of the repeated key Vergenère ciphers. So this is relatively simple to the Alberti cipher, as it is based on a single ordinary alphabet and can be easily solved after discovering its fixed period by means of the Kasiski exam. We then have the Playfair cipher. So this is a manual symmetric encryption technique and was the first literal diagram substitution cipher, diagram referring to a pair of letters. And this cipher was invented in 1854 by Sir Charles Wheatstone, but bears the name of Lord Playfair for promoting its use. And this encrypts pairs of letters instead of a single letter. And so on the right we have this 5 by 5 matrix of letters with each letter appearing only once. And so the plain text is divided into pairs of letters, and each pair is encrypted using the positions of the letters in the matrix. And this was considered to be very popular during World War I, which is because the Playfair is reasonably fast to use and requires no special equipment. And a typical scenario for Playfair was to protect important but non-critical secrets during actual combat. Wait, I have one final thing to say about polyalphabetic ciphers. So the principle of polyalphabetic substitution, in particular Alberti's unlimited additional substitution alphabets, was a major advance in the history of cryptography. So this principle helped to lay the foundation for more advanced encryption techniques such as the rotor machines and the Enigma machine, which are very popular. And it was not until like mid 19th century that cryptanalysis of well implemented polyalphabetic ciphers progressed rapidly. And now we have book ciphers, which can be defined as any means of concealment in which a book or an existing text is used as the basis for a cipher. And so they may include techniques like methods like centos, in which the words taken from the text are rearranged to form a different story, acrostics, so those are built into the text and are extracted according to various rules to form a hidden meaning, and anagrams, in which the letters of the text are rearranged. And so the encoding to decode it, the recipient would have to have a copy of the exact same book, the same edition, and all that. So a famous use of the big book cipher is in the Beale papers. So of which document number, which is a set of 3 ciphertexts, of which document number 2 uses the United States Declaration of Independence as the key text. So this is an interesting story. These Beale ciphers are a set of 3 texts. So one of which they allegedly state the location of a buried treasure, and so this like the story originated when an 1885 pamphlet was detailing the treasure was released, all the Beale papers, and so Beale was a man who entrusted a box containing the encrypted messages to a local innkeeper and then disappeared. So the innkeeper gave this to his friend. He did not open the box at all, and when he did, he just gave it to his friend, who then spent the next 20 years of his life trying to decode the message and was only able to solve one of them, which gave details of the treasure buried and the general location of the treasure. And so a number of attempts have been made to decode the remaining 2, but all efforts have resulted in failure. And we needn't it isn't certain that there is treasure buried in the first place. Next, we have the novel The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. And here the protagonist Robert Langdon uses a book cipher that was based on the works of Leonardo da Vinci to decode a message. So in here, the book cipher is the primary encryption method, and the ADBAS cipher from the Hebrew Bible that I mentioned before serves as a tool to aid in the process. And so the book ciphers have 2 main weaknesses. First off, their use is time consuming. Each character must be encoded by a few numbers and must be separately found in a given book during decryption. And secondly, there is a real danger that the intruder will guess the book which is used by both sides for encrypting their communication, and then the cat is out of the bag. Next up, we have the Cardan grill. So this is a very simple technique, and this is a method of writing secret messages using a grid, and was invented by the Italian mathematician Girolamo Cardano in the 16th century. So it consists of a rectangular piece of cardboard or paper with a series of holes cut out in a specific pattern, and then when placed over a plain text message, aligning the holes with the letters, we can then decode this. So one of the advantages of this is that it is a very simple and effective method that can be quickly learnt and used. And prominent figures that are known to have used the Cardan grill include Sir Francis Bacon and Cardinal Richelieu. So this inspired the development of other polygraphic substitution ciphers like the grill cipher and the Playfair cipher. So a rather impractical method of the book cipher was suggested by Vergniaud in 1586, which consists of placing a transparent sheet over the pages of a book and underlining the words you wish to use on the transparent sheet, which can be considered equivalent to a rather simple grill. We then have the Great Cipher of Louis XIV, which was a nomenclator cipher developed by the Rossignols in the late 17th century, who were a French family that were known they have a legacy of producing famous French cryptographers. And to give more context, a nomenclator cipher is an encryption method which replaces a letter with a word or a group of words. This is a polygraphic substitution cipher that will use a combination of homophones and nulls to represent groups of letters rather than an individual letter. And this was a major advancement in cryptography, as it was one of the first codes to use homophones, and this made frequency analysis and other traditional code breaking techniques very less effective. And brushing up on what a homophone cipher is, Each letter of the alphabet could be encoded using several cipher symbols, and this cipher was so strong that it remained unbroken for over 200 years. It was eventually deciphered in the late 19th century by Etienne Baziris, a French army captain and cryptographer, who spent over 3 years working on this cipher. Now I shall give a quick run through of the most notable breakthroughs of the modern era till date. So first off, we have the Morse code, which is a method of transmitting text messages using a series of dots and dashes that can be directly understood by the receiver. While it isn't in widespread use currently, it is being used by ships at sea, amateur radio communication, etc. We then have the rotor machine, also known as the Enigma rotor machine, that was invented by Arthur Scherbius and Richard Ritter in the early 20th century. The Enigma machine was an encryption machine that was used by the Germans during World War II to encrypt military messages. And this is quite popular. There have been movies made about this. And this was based on the rotor machine design and was considered by many to be one of the most complex encryption machines of its time. We then have the RSA encryption algorithm, which is used widely today to secure electronic communication. RSA meaning the inventor's Reverse Shamir Edelman. So this is a type of public key cryptography, which means that it uses a pair of keys generated using prime numbers. So we have a public key which can be freely shared to like access a website, and then a private key which is kept secret. So this is widely used in secure communication protocols today. For example, we all know about HTTPS. Moving on, we have the quantum key distribution that is a cryptographic technique based on the principles of quantum mechanics, which has the potential to provide extremely secure communication. Here I've given a list of references and further reading where you can which you can go through for more interesting stories. And so this is no. The history of codes and ciphers was very interesting to read about, and as you keep digging deep, you'll get more and more interesting information. I had a great time reading about the history behind electrical engineering that pertaining to the development of various codes and ciphers. And one can see how cryptology decides the flow of a war and how monumental its impact can be, as information might well be considered to be humanity's greatest weapon. Thank you for listening to my seminar.